Once again, a very, very, very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to the monthly technical session organized by the Society of Petroleum Engineers Abuja section. Of course, SPE is all about disseminating technical information around everything in the energy sector. And of course, SPE Abuja is doing this for the month of November. We are so pleased to have him, Melkevic, who is the CEO of Carbon Limits Nigeria, speak to us for about 35 minutes today on the theme, the role of regulations in carbon projects and decarbonization in Nigeria. And I'd like to say a warm welcome to all of our amazing participants that have joined us from all parts of the world. I will continue this event by sharing the safety brief. As you can see my screen, the safety brief, the safety moment is on the screen. We have the arrival of participants, and then we have the safety brief. We'll introduce our guest speaker, and of course, dignitaries that have joined the event. We'll have a welcome remarks by our section chair. After that, the moderator will highlight the profile of the speaker, and then you also have the technical lecture by the speaker, which will last for about 35 minutes, and then you have about 10 minutes for question and answers. Immediately after the question and answers, we'll have the closing remark by our programs chair. And of course, we call it a day. It's going to be a very brief, interesting, and of course, engaging session today. So if you're excited, can I know what part of the world you're joining us from? Go to the chat portion, go to the chat part of this call. Just drop your name and what part of the world you're joining us from. Are you joining from Port Harcourt, from Abuja, from any part of Africa? Let's just read. Kindly go to the chat section and drop what parts of the world you're coming us from. You're joining us from. Thank you. Okay, we can see Kafayat from Abuja, Hin from Lagos. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Please, for the 10 participants that have joined, kindly do a favor, share this link to your colleagues all around Nigeria. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We say welcome, Salim Usman, all the way from Abuja. Welcome, Salim. We celebrate you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, switching gears to the safety brief. The energy sector is very particular about safety. We kindly appeal that for the course of this event, if you are not speaking, kindly leave your microphone on mute so that you may not cause interference with the deliberations we're going to have today. Just in case you want to speak, you can raise your hands, and of course, we would allow you to speak. And then you can also use the chat button, C for comments and Q for questions. We also appeal that you stay safe in your environment, and if you're driving, kindly ensure that you park so that you can enjoy this technical lecture. We say one welcome once again to all of our distinguished participants. Adegbe Miros, joining from Sagamu, welcome, 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 welcome. Of course, I would like to join by saying a very, very happy International Men's Day to all of the men joining from all parts of the world. Thank you. Thank you. We continue this event by recognizing all of the amazing dignitaries that have joined us from all parts. We start by saying a warm welcome to the section chairman of SPE Abuja section. Welcome, Engineer Ikechukwu Okafor, PhD. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Akpan, and good evening, everybody on the call. Good to be here. Thank you.
We also say a warm welcome to our programs chair of the section. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Professor Kafayat Adeyemi. Welcome, Prof. We celebrate you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, ma'am. We will welcome all of our distinguished members, student members from all parts of Nigeria that have joined. As time gives me, as we go on, I will recognize you as they keep joining. I'd like to say a warm welcome to the Chief Executive Officer of Carbon Limits Nigeria, Hin Melkevic. Welcome, sir. We celebrate you. Amazing. Like a thumbs up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome, sir. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we switch gears immediately to the man that is inspiring us to excellence in the section, the one and only Dr. Ikechukwu Okafor, of course, as section chairman. Section chair, please, the visual stage is yours for your remark.
I confirm you can hear me.
Loud and clear, though we cannot see you, sir.
Okay, see me in the moment. Confirm you can hear and also see me.
Absolutely, sir. We see you, sir.
Okay. A very good evening to everyone who has joined this monthly technical meeting for the month of November, organized by SP Abuja section. It's our pleasure to bring such an epoch event to you, an event that speaks to critical concern on the need to decarbonize, especially in an era where we are beginning to look at managing carbon emission. I want to say a very big welcome to our guest speaker today, the CEO Carbon Limits Nigeria, Mr. Hank Melvik. It's good to have you here, sir. And, we are looking forward to having this 12 time with you, speaking to us about the role of regulation in carbon projects and decarbonization. It's a critical topic. It's a topical one too, and I think we can't wait to have you on board and share your knowledge and experience with us. And to everyone who has joined from the executive, the board members of SP Abuja section, to the student members and young professionals, on behalf of the board of SP Abuja section, we welcome you and we say we are glad to have you. Thank you. Hello, Akpan, can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Section Chair, for that very brief, of course, insightful welcome remark. Thank you so much for leading the section to excellence. Of course, the focus of today's theme is to highlight the progress made in implementing carbon projects within the oil and gas industry. Of course, our speaker today is going to speak on different areas. He's going to give us an overview of the Nigerian's climate commitments and targets. He's going to give us an overview of existing regulations in the oil and gas industry relating to decarbonization. Of course, he's going to also give us success stories of carbon projects implemented within Nigerian's oil and gas sector. It's going to be a very engaging 35 minutes with this amazing speaker. Of course, his bio is on your screen. Our speaker is the CEO and Managing Director of Carbon Limits Nigeria. He has global expertise across the energy value chain, spanning from fossil fuels to renewable. He holds a BSc in International Business and an MSc in Applied Economics and Finance, both from Copenhagen Business School. He also completed exchange programs at the Faculty of MBA and Finance in Venezuela and the Faculty of Economics at the Smart University in Thailand. Throughout his 14 years tenure at Equinor, he has held various leadership positions across the globe. These include serving as a deputy country manager, where he oversaw international explorations efforts in Tanzania, Mozambique, and Australia. Further, he served as managing director for exploration in Colombia and Suriname. As managing director and VP of Equinor Nigeria, he focused on oil and gas operations, as well as on emerging energy solutions such as biofuels and hydrogen. Fluent in multiple languages and equipped with extensive leadership experience, he's a key player in the international energy industry with a decade of senior management experience. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please help me with some virtual round of applause. Welcome Hein Melkevik, the CEO of Carbon Limits Nigeria, as he takes us on the role of regulations in carbon projects and decarbonization of the oil and gas industry. Hello, Hein. Are you hearing me? Would like to hear from you.
Yes, very much so. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, if at any point there is a problem with my link or something, please just comment in the comment section so that I can see it, because I have that up on the side here. As you saw, I have a bit of experience from the oil and gas sector. So my role of kind of coming into the climate space and the regulation side on climate is actually through the role that I'm holding now. But also it started many years ago, where when I was working in Equinor, obviously Equinor was very early out on finding ways to decarbonize the operations, upstream operations in both Norway, but also globally. Within the kind of last 10-year or arc of 10 years, there was obviously a lot of change that happened within the company, as well as within, you know, the global setting when it comes to the focus on climate change and the focus on sustainability. I give this example quite a few times, actually, where 10, 12 years ago, I was reading a sustainability report, which was done by a Norwegian pension fund or pension manager. And that was one of the first sustainability reports in the world, where this company basically, you know, counted the amount of, or, you know, had a goal of having less carbon paper, or sorry, copy paper, as well as less traveling or measuring traveling, as well as looking at all the carbon footprint of that whole company. And that's just a decade ago. And at that time, I remember we had it up in a management meeting, and we kind of have it as a case study, where many people said, well, this is, you know, futuristic. This is not happening for many, many years. And, you know, who will go around, you know, kind of counting and making sure that we are traveling less. We travel if we need to travel. We use the water and the, you know, electricity and emissions that we have. That's part of our business. And by the way, this pension manager also looks at managing the companies where they only have 0.5% interest in, and somehow they think that they are able to impact on these companies. I think we all can agree that in the last 10 years, this is no longer futuristic. I think the global world is one where, or the globalized world is one where we see these things very much being in the forefront of everyone's mind at the moment. And it's something that is moving very rapidly towards this being very important. And as we speak today, obviously the COP29, so the climate talks are ongoing in Baku in Azerbaijan, where I know for a fact that a very large delegation from Nigeria is there, as well as, of course, all other delegations around the world. And incidentally, one of the big issues at the COP29 currently, and what is becoming apparently a very potentially sore topic, is around how does rich developed countries help and support developing countries, or countries that are at a lower scale of industrialization. How do rich countries support them by incentivizing them to do the right things when it comes to lower emissions? Now, this is, of course, very global, but as we will go into today in the presentation, I will want to try and kind of paint a picture of why this is an issue that it really is very important for all participants in the oil and gas space, particularly also in Nigeria. And I think it's interesting, again, just to keep in the back of your head, 10 years ago, this was futuristic for absolutely everyone. And now probably it's definitely at the core of most global questions. That being said, I think it's time to if SBE, if you have my presentation, if you could share it on the screen, I would be very much grateful. And if not, please let me know, and I'll find a way to share it on my side. I'm not a computer whiz, but I'll do my best.
I've given you the permission to share it, sir. You can share it.
So yeah, so okay, let me see if I can do that. Let me see. I will find it. Let me see. So hopefully you can see my screen. I will now make this large. Can you see the screen?
Yes, very well, very well.
All right, very good. So then moving into, obviously I'm conscious of time, but I really want to take the time also to explain a little bit, setting a little bit of the scene of where we are when it comes to deregulation and regulation in carbon projects, as well as the decarbonization of the oil and gas industry. I want to kind of set the scene first. So who is Carbon Limits Nigeria? We are kind of two things at the same time. We're both an advisory where we advise companies. For 15 years now, we've been advising companies in Nigeria, but also across sub-Saharan Africa. when it comes to issues that pertains around carbon emissions, ESG, and pathways to lower emissions. So think of this in one way, in a broad sense, in that it's not only about carbon, and I think that will be clear as we go through the presentation. And it's not only about lowering emissions, it's also about the regulations and about how different countries have different approaches and what does that mean for the industry as a total, industry being both within the oil and gas industry as well as any other type of industry. I was in Cape Town just a week and a half ago for the Africa Energy Week. I think it's clear, it's very important that we need to balance the obviously lower emissions. And as I hinted to in the COP29, this is a similar issue. We have to balance the issue of lower emissions with the opportunity and the benefit of higher economic development and industrialization across Africa, as well as in other parts of the world where industrialization has not happened to the same extent as, for example, in Western Europe. So this is extremely important, and therefore, you know, the things that I'm to talk about today is something that hopefully will give you all some more words and some more ideas around what that potentially means. So before kind of going into Nigeria specifically, I really want to talk around what is really GHG emissions, i.e. greenhouse gas emissions, as well as what is the carbon market. So that's kind of setting the scene in terms of what is it and what is it not. Then we will get into a little bit on the overview of what Nigeria has already committed in terms of climate targets. And that's, of course, I've tried to the degree possible there to do that with regard to the oil and gas, but I will talk around what it potentially also means across the call it industries and across the country of Nigeria, because it's of course bigger than just oil and gas. Then there are some particular regulations within Nigeria for the oil and gas industry when it comes to decarbonization. And then we, as I said, we are doing two different things as a company. We are an advisory, but we also develop carbon reduction projects, specifically carbon reduction projects, together with the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. So we basically go in, we do carbon credits, we do flare outs, we do methane leak detection and repair, we support on installing vapor recovery units, and part of the way that such projects are incentivized is through carbon credits. So that's kind of linking up again to the carbon market. We were actually practitioners on the ground in Nigeria, as I said, for 15 years. And so we'll share some of those opportunities. And then we will also showcase how regulations could be, you know, to a degree changed to further incentivize decarbonization, and that obviously being either through carbon projects or just generally through carbonization for the sake of lower emissions, which is obviously the target for everyone. So I want to start with basically saying that we now are in a situation where we are obviously learning about what this is all about. And from that, we will hopefully, and I'm sure we will, because I'm surrounded by and I'm joined by very, very smart people. You will be now in a situation where you will learn things that are new, and that this is not me saying that I know the full truth and the only truth, but hopefully this is very useful for you in your daily practice. The illustration here is just kind of to indicate that sustainability is much broader, and I think this illustrates it very well. It's a drawing we made to illustrate what we mean when we say sustainability. It's got everything to do with energy, but it also has to do with circularity, has to do with the planet, the ecology, i.e. the world we live in, both waterway and forests and everything in between, as well as, of course, how we act and how we have economic activity in the world. So think of that quite broadly, both about putting lights and food on the table, as well as ensuring that tomorrow we're healthier and stronger and more resilient than we were yesterday. So changing gears a little bit, I'm watching the time here, so we got plenty of time to talk about these things. I think one of the things that is quite interesting, if you look at the world and why are we talking about decarbonization, it's extremely important to understand, at least as I see it, that although we come at this from different angles, globally, there is a general understanding that some of the risks, or most of the risks, that people across the world see are, and this is a global risk perception, so this is really across the world globally. Short term, obviously, there are certain things that we look at that we find to be, of, call it, near-term importance. But when we look a little bit further out, most human beings, most people on this planet have a significant share of their risks are around environment. And that everything from just obviously the number one, which is the failure to mitigate climate change. But then there are others that are, very much linked, which is the failure to change or adapt to climate change, as well as the fact that many people are afraid of both the natural disasters and extreme weathers that might occur on the back of this, etc., etc. And if you see some of the other risks there as well, I would argue that besides the purple technological risk, even the two red ones and the orange one on the 10-year horizon surely has a lot to do with climate, but also how we manage our resources. So it's all to say that globally there is certainly a very large concern around that. And the question then is, why is that the case? And if we then move on, well, one thing is for sure. So it's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not gonna. It's not that I don't have any problem sharing when I was born, and that was in 1980. If you see there, we were around 4.2-3 million or 200-300 million people on the planet, and now if we're kind of extrapolating out a bit, we're almost double in just my short lifespan as I've had it so far. We're more than doubling the population. Now, I brought this slide up because I think it's extremely important if we think about it from the point of view of Nigeria particularly. Obviously, as you know, Nigeria is like a mini snapshot of this picture, where Nigeria will be, unless Nigerians stop making babies, Nigeria will be the third largest country on this planet by 2050. So actually, Africa is going to have more than 90% of the remaining population growth globally until we taper off at around 9.5-10 billion, sometimes after 2060. And then obviously that's a long time in the future, but all projections kind of indicate that we will kind of top out at that and then kind of start going down. The point being that obviously population, and you will see that on the next slide, has an enormously important impact on the total emissions that are in the world. And the reason for this is obviously because the world, people, we like to consume things, and we need a certain level of, we are getting used to a certain level of consumption. And with population growth, as well as with the increased economic development across the globe, obviously then it seems very, very well correlated that has an impact directly on the carbon emissions that are being emitted to the atmosphere and the amount of CO2 that is in the atmosphere at any given time. And I think that's very important in the sense that if you see the blue line, you talk to certain people, they will tell you that, well, there are many events that happen where, you know, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere will go up and down over time because of XYZ reason. It could be, I don't know, volcano, it could be a forest fire, it could be this, it could be that. If you look at the actual available information, and this is nothing to say about whether or not CO2 per se has any impact on anything, it's just to illustrate that there seems to be a very clear correlation between the amount of CO2 emissions, which is the gray line, that's CO2 emissions that come from humans, and the blue line, which is the amount of CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere. So obviously the gray line coincides very well with the start of the Industrial Revolution, and then it takes off as more than just UK and a few other European countries, including the US, starts developing, and then it has an exponential growth in terms of CO2 emissions. And then we are looking out at 2020, which is the end of this data point. You see that obviously we're at a significantly higher CO2 emissions per year, and that again then has seemingly a very high correlation with the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Again, linking this back to the previous slides, there is of course a clear link between population growth and economic growth with the amount of emissions that human beings emit. Now, why is that important? It's important because the CO2, and I'm not going to dwell on this, this is very familiar to you, it's just to kind of make sure that we said it. The greenhouse gases, which are more than just CO2, we'll come back to that on the next slide, they have a tendency to trap heat inside of the atmosphere, which then over time slowly increases the call it average temperature across the globe because the heat cannot leave. So this illustration is just to kind of state that obviously in the pre-CO2 or higher CO2 levels, there were also still CO2 in the atmosphere, but to a much lower degree, and therefore lower amounts of heat were trapped inside of the atmosphere. Now, what are then the man-made, so the anthropogenic activities that accelerate climate change? There are many different ones. They start off with, not necessarily starting off, but it's everything from power generation, which many would argue is the basis for most of the things we are to do. But again, it also has to do with mining processes, deforestation, transportation, industry, domestic, and all sorts of other emissions. There's obviously another way of looking at these type of emissions, and this is just kind of one way of call it sectoring in or dividing what are the sources for CO2 emissions. Another way of looking at it is actually the 7 major greenhouse gases. So these are the gases that are the gases that generally are, to call it, blame, or who's been linked to a carbon, to a impact on climate. And this will be later on in the presentation, this will be a bit evident why this is important. They are being separated. And the reason, which we can talk a little bit about here, is that carbon dioxide is actually the very simplest of these gases. They are the least, call it, dangerous to the greenhouse gas effect. They have the least effect, but they are a very good common denominator to which all the other gases here can be named in. So think of carbon dioxide as the dollar, and then you think of all the other ones as products that you are paying for in dollars. So, for example, methane will have a higher cost than 1. With carbon dioxide is the unit of 1, methane will be a higher one, and we'll come back to that on another slide. And just here, and I think it's extremely important of all these gases, the one that obviously makes that has direct impact between the oil and gas industry and ourselves, it's the two first ones, right? It's the burning of fossil fuels, solid waste, trees, and other biological materials, as well as every type of industrial process. And then, of course, methane is very much about coal, natural gas, oil, and of course, again, also livestock. And as you've probably all seen and heard, we tend to say that, cows are, when they digest food, they do end up having a lot of gases in their stomach, and obviously this is methane, which then is a significant climate risk, which then again comes into the carbon footprint, as it were, of your steak. Anyway, these are the 7 major greenhouse gases. As you see, the fluorinated gases at the bottom are really specialty gases that come out of call it special or high technology industries, where this is then being used, for example, in air conditioning and refrigeration, etc. Now, if you then look at this from the point of view of the kind of contribution per sector, so recall that we are now looking at this from the point of view of, we kind of gotten familiar with the gases, we've gotten familiar with where the sources of such gases are from. And if we then do it by sector, this is globally, we'll get to Nigeria very soon. It's actually interesting to see that obviously the energy industry and electricity are obviously, as well as transportation, of course, are industries that at least partly, if not directly, are impacted both positively and negatively by the oil and gas industry, right? We produce everything from chemicals to obviously transportation fuel, and of course electricity comes to a large degree, and heat production from natural gas, but also of course the actual production and use of gas, of production of hydrocarbons, and we'll get into that more detail very soon. Where I really want to drag you now is to really understand why is it that there is so much regulation around the energy sector per se. So if we then go to the type of gas, again, we recall we were talking of gases in the previous slide. You see CO2, although it's the least harmful of these gases, they are of course the most numerous. So you see it's more than almost 90% of all the gas is either CO2 or methane, whereas the nitrous oxide as well as the fluorinated gases is a very small piece. Later on, you'll see that this still has a significant impact, especially the fluorinated gases, which we'll get back to, which is in their potential for for emission, greenhouse gas potential is much higher. And therefore, it is extremely important that that's also maintained. Obviously, we're here to talk about oil and gas today, and obviously then methane and CO2 becomes extremely important, but I want to make sure we have a full picture. If we then look at the GHG contribution of Nigeria, then we have a very different picture. And now potentially you also understand why we are called Carbon Limits Nigeria, and why we are generally focused on reaching out to the energy sector, working with everything from regulator down to the operator, down to EPC contractors and financiers, is really because the vast majority of the emissions that come out of Nigeria as accounted for by Nigeria, and I think this might be a very important topic, or this might be a very important point that I will reach, or I will reiterate very soon as we get to Nigeria's commitments, which you could say are global commitments, i.e. they don't necessarily pertain directly to energy. But it's obvious then when 60% of the 60% of the GHG contribution from Nigeria comes from energy, it obviously means that energy is extremely important in the solving of the emission reduction efforts by Nigeria and the commitments that Nigeria has made. So keep in mind 60% or roughly, and then we'll get back to that in terms of why that matters. Now, here is then the global warming potential of the various gases. And recall, I mentioned that, and of course, it's always nice to look at these like very extreme ones that are, for example, sulfur hexafluoride at the very bottom. But I think what's is much more interesting is actually the extreme difference between carbon dioxide and methane. So it means that the global warming potential of 1 ton of carbon dioxide is 1, right? So that's it's the unit of measurement, as it were. And if you then look at methane, it's 27 to 30 times more damaging, or has 30 times the potential of global warming that has carbon dioxide. And recall back, as we looked at a couple of slides ago, the methane didn't look as such an extreme amount of the emissions that are being emitted. But since it's 30 times more damaging, actually methane is a much bigger challenge than carbon dioxide in a sense, because the points where methane is leaking are fewer, certainly in the industries, and certainly in the oil and gas, whereas carbon dioxide is emitted from very small points to very large points and everything in between. Now, of course, the fluoroids, as you see them at the bottom here, are of course extremely damaging to the environment. But again, this is something that is kind of outside of scope for this lecture or for this conversation, but it's just important, as I said, that we have a full picture. So really think about methane as 30 times as damaging as carbon dioxide, and that has a very, very important issue when we come to how we manage our oil field. So with this in mind, which is just base knowledge in terms of the emission and GHG emissions, etc. Why are carbon markets relevant? And they are relevant in the sense that it's really around, and it's been around for a long time, it's about finding ways to do a project-based mechanism for finding ways to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions under a global protocol, which used to be called it still is called the Kyoto Protocol. This has, of course, been further developed into the Paris Agreement and to other such, call it, auspices of this. However, it's still the same principle remains, and that's that it's to find ways to encourage developing countries to participate in GHG emission reductions. And in order for that, to find ways for that to be happening is really around allowing that the emissions that are being quantified, where you reduce emissions from a project, and that these emissions can be transferred, i.e. sold, between a country to another. And then when you sell something, obviously you get money in return. So this is really why carbon markets are relevant for the emissions that we just looked at. So it's a long-established practice where there are global frameworks for finding willing capital that will move into a developing country to do a project to reduce emissions, where in return for that, the provider of the capital gets the actual verified emission reductions in return. And there are many protocols and many standards and methodologies for this, but this is the kind of overarching principle. So if you look at the then at the bottom here, in order to kind of have a control over this, and in order to kind of find ways to manage this, there is a registry for such greenhouse gas emission reduction projects, and that they will then be certified, which then are called CERS, or certified emission reductions. And there are many, many different markets that have come out of this. But again, the basic fact remains, it's to not have the same project registered twice, And it also means that each project needs to be verified and validated by external parties, and that the principle of kind of exchange is there. As you see, there's been a number of projects from around the world being registered, and then of them, four flaring clean development mechanisms. So CDM stands for Clean Development Mechanism, which is the Kyoto Protocol, has been done in Nigeria, and we are actually happy to say we are doing a fair number of more of such projects now. One common misunderstanding is that there is something called carbon taxes, and then there is a emission trading scheme. These are different in that carbon taxes is a tax that a government will put on any industry, whereas emission trading schemes are either ways to have companies with different levels of emissions trade them between each other in order to incentivize and call it the best or the lowest emitter to continue to emit low, and to punish the higher emitter to having to pay more for emitting more. These are different. Both of these are different from a carbon market, right? The carbon tax is basically just a tax, and the emission trading scheme is a scheme where within, for example, the EU, there is a regulated market that you trade between each other, but in the end, it's a zero-sum game. I have something that you want, you pay me, I get money, you get really nothing, you just get the allowance to emit. Will be clear on the next slide. So on the left-hand side, you see how a emission trading system work. You have an emitter that is high emitter, and you have a emitter that has low emission, and then one buys from the other. But in the end, the total emissions from that, call it conceptual, obviously drawing that you see on the left-hand side, actually, conceptually speaking, on a year-on-year basis, has zero actual environmental impact, right? One has a higher emission, the other one has a lower, and in between they trade where for emitting, you probably want to find ways to reduce your emissions, which then obviously is in a way on a longer term effect, there is a lower emission. But this is call it further down the line, right? It's not the first iteration. The CDM, so again, Clean Development Mechanism, i.e. a carbon market or a carbon trading market, has a industrialized country with GHG emission. You get finance, technology, capacity building support, and payment to reduce reduce emissions in a project in a developing country. And that emission reduction, actual emission reduction, is then sold or given as carbon credits to the industrialized country for reducing their emissions. So actual reduction happens as the starting point together with capacity building and support. And in return, the industrialized country gets the carbon credits. But all in all, lower emissions has happened and money has changed hands. So in a way then, to just say there are many different ways to have these type of projects, which are different from both the carbon tax and from a cap and trade. You have the CDM, as I said, the Clean Development Mechanism. You have voluntary carbon markets, which is, for example, Gold Standard, Vera, etc. You have CORSIA, which is the aviation fuel offset. There is the EU FQD, which is a situation where buyers of fuel in certain countries in Europe are paying an extra price in order to be able to have to use a fuel, to pay for fuel. And in return, that money that they pay extra goes to emission reduction projects in, for example, we have done a number of those projects in Nigeria for oil and gas companies. And then you have the Paris Agreement Article 6, which will be extremely important this week, which is Article 6.2 and 6.4. So that's why that's in light gray. It's not established conceptually yet, but it's ongoing, about to happen. Again, all of these are various mechanisms to incentivize developing countries to reduce emissions from high emission sources. So the ways that this could be done is both a bilateral and multilateral agreement, i.e. countries can agree to do this across various parts and pieces, or it's between the carbon markets, right? So we just talked about them. So I'm not going to go into more detail. It's just to say there are different ways that this can work, and this is what the Paris Agreement Article 6.2 and 6.4 is saying. Now, obviously, Africa has an enormous potential for carbon credits, actually, because it's both in terms of nature-based, i.e. you reduce emissions from planting trees, but also from industrial emission reductions, or even think about it, we have 50 million diesel generators in Nigeria. If you change them out for solar or for diesel generators, obviously the emissions would be much, much lower, which again is a carbon it's a carbon reduction, which again then becomes carbon offset. And here are just the various, call it different ways that this can be done. I'm not going to go into these. It's just because obviously it's just to illustrate that there are many different ways that we can participate in this, and this is what we do. Again, back to our advisory side, as well as our development of actual carbon credits. But for the oil and gas, let's just move on, because really it's around, how do we manage it on the oil and gas side? And then finally, it's just to also show that actually this is growing. There's an enormous amount of appetite for such projects. This goes up to 2022, but of course a 29% per annum increase in the volumes tells all of us that there is an enormous potential and growth and interest and appetite for these projects across Africa, or globally for African projects. So thereby we go into what is Nigeria's decarbonization commitments. And I think what I've done so far is just to kind of set the scene for why Nigeria has committed to what they've committed on the next slides. So please take it in that light, that obviously there is a backstory here which we have now established. So Nigeria became a signatory to the Paris Accord in 2016, which then was ratified in 2017. And Nigeria has actually signed up to, for example, the Global Methane Alliance, which pledges to reduce emissions by at least 45% by 2025, i.e. very soon, as well as by 60 to 75% by 2030. There's also there are of course then actions have been taken in between that global methane pledge, both in terms of methane guidelines with the NUPRC, as well as the National Gas Flare Commercialization Program, and then of course the plan to have a net zero carbon emissions by 2060, which obviously then has many different approach or many different phases, which obviously, as we said earlier, has energy has an enormously important part to play there. Now, all of what I said so far is really in what is called the National Determined Contributions, and that's the NDC, which is the bottom point in this slide. In this, Nigeria has committed to net flaring by 2030, and as was illustrated also by the Methane Alliance, 60% of fugitive methane emission reduction by 2031. This is the commitment that Nigeria has posed on itself according to the Paris Accord, which they ratified in 2017. I think we can agree that we are not there yet. And therefore, obviously, we are busy at work. And that's also why NUPRC and many other governmental institutions are busy at work on these things. It is, of course, important to also mention that almost no country, really no country, is going to meet their targets, besides a very few handful of quite small countries, right? So Nigeria is not alone, but of course the pressure is increasing. Now, recall we said that the energy sector, right? So this slide we know from before, 60% of all the emissions in Nigeria comes from oil and gas. So what I mean by that is that it's extremely clear to everyone in Nigeria, meaning NUPRC and all other regulators and government, as well as, government, call it civil institutions, that the energy was going to play a very important role, both from flare outs, i.e. taking out the flares. And we can always look at this and say, well, actually, we shouldn't be flaring because we should use the gas because we actually have a energy shortage in Nigeria. And that's, of course, extremely valid and true. The interesting thing is that you can make money from taking out your flare 3 ways. 1, you don't have to pay a flare fine. 2, you can sell the gas. And 3, you can get carbon credits for taking out your flare. In addition to that, you can get all the same benefits from stopping your leaks, i.e. your methane leaks. You can get value, well, you can't get flare fine reduction because you're not really flaring, but you can certainly sell the gas instead of it being leaked to the atmosphere, and you can get carbon credits, and that's where we come in. Now, just then to say, the NDC, right, so the National Determined Contribution, they have targets on gas flaring reduction as well as the fugitive methane reduction. The valid or important policies and regulations for this is the National Commercialization Program, the National Gas Policy. These are, of course, all-encompassing, large-scale, call it not laws, but direction of travel. But then you have flare gas regulation, which obviously imposes a fine. You have the National Climate Change Act, which actually is quite interesting. Nigeria has an act, a law, that basically is everything that has to do with the way that Nigeria has committed itself to Paris and to all other such international accords. And there's a whole setup and framework around it, which is all in the National Climate Change Act. And then you, of course, also have the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, which again, of course, not all of it, but certain parts of it has a lot to do with emissions and how you design and take care of the environment in terms of where you are operating. For methane, you have the guidelines for fugitive methane emission reduction. Again, you have the National Climate Change Act and the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. So that in mind, so again, back to what we kind of been doing here in Nigeria. And again, let me just in a way flag this one more time. There are many ways that this is positively impacting, besides the fact that I think it's clear that the government, not only in Nigeria, but across the world, is going to look quite strongly at the commitments that have been made and the results that have been achieved, i.e. it's probably smart to be in the forefront on this as an operator. But in addition, just to flag the troika of opportunity here, you forgo of of flare fine, you get sales gas that you will get money for, and then you will get carbon credits, i.e. economic incentives to reduce your emissions from abroad, and all of those 3 at the same time. So we have done a number of such projects, and here are 4 of them. If you see the Platform Petroleum, the Synergy, the New Cross, and the Seplat Energy project, 2 of them are being done right now. Those are the 2 lower ones, and then the 2 top ones are the ones we finished just a few years ago. In addition to that, we have made a number of other projects that have gone and tackled both the methane leaks, as well as other very large flares. which has then been commercialized instead of flaring. So finally, the slide. What really, what is it that would change things around, or what is in store, I think really is the way to put this. There are certain complexities with overlapping regulations, but I think in my experience is that NUPRC, the NCCC, which is the National Council for Climate Change, as well as many other governmental institutions and parastatals, are all coming more and more aligned. And this again comes back to this idea that obviously as the commitments that are being set by the country is, call it, not being met, or it looks evidently so that it won't be met, it means that there is obviously stronger and stronger focus on ensuring that these regulatory complexities are being tackled. There are certain permitting requirements that have been obviously challenging, everything from local content, et cetera, but this is again something that we see certainly has improved a lot. Then there is what is called monitoring, reporting, and verification frameworks. This is explicitly mentioned in the Climate Change Act. So this is certainly something that has come out very clearly. Then there are limited regulatory incentives for decarbonization projects. Again, I think we all understand that this one and the one at the bottom, which are the knowledge gaps within the regulatory agencies and institutions. Both of them are coming more and more, they are being clarified more and more due to the fact that there is a growing concern around, or a growing emphasis on the fact that commitments are not being made. So anyway, to kind of finalize, I think and to summarize, I think it's extremely important that we look at these things about, and this is what we do, is we work in what we, as the bottom conclusion here, which is the public-private partnerships. I mean, we're a private company. We work in this space only. We work with other private enterprises, i.e. the oil and gas independents, as well as the larger oil and gas companies, as well as we work with regulatory bodies in Nigeria and across Africa. And we do so in order to ensure decarbonization projects happen. And we are working with the regulatory side of things, and as an in-between the operators and the regulatory side, to strengthen both the MRV systems, which was monitoring and as you see here, monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, as well as finding ways to showcase that there are clear incentives. And this is one of those examples. I'm having this talk with you today to show that there are incentives for decarbonization, and making sure that everyone are aware of that. That goes through the capacity building, as well as then we are very clear about the fact that we want to see a simple or clear expectations from the regulatory side in terms of what is it that the oil companies actually are expected to do when it comes to their mission focus. So with that in mind, I want to thank you, and do apologize for running 5 minutes over time. Thank you very much. I'm done with my presentation in case.
Can you hear him? He's done.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So, of course, we are switching gears to question and answers right about now. So if you have your questions, we'd like you to raise your hands, or probably drop your questions in the chat box so that we can attend to it appropriately. So please, we'd like to have your questions at this point. Thank you so much, sir, for the amazing lecture. And we want to believe that there are so many questions as people would love to ask. Please, if you have questions. Okay, Anthony Justice, I see your hands raised up. Can you unmute your microphone and speak? Anthony Justice, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is this: I saw most of the projects that you do concerning the emission
Not picking.
about offset. So more or less, it feels like
On
it's
your
more or less
WhatsApp.
would I
Send
say
hi.
targeted
Let me see
towards
WhatsApp.
institutions or companies? What about on an individual basis as well? What if like
Let me
people
see
want to actually
WhatsApp. Send hi first on
contribute?
WhatsApp. Let's see if the WhatsApp has.
You are
Sorry,
not
Okay.
muted.
so SP Abuja, please mute, please. You're talking. Thank you. Okay, sorry,
Okay.
Anthony Justice, please. Can you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
Okay, so my question was, I saw most of the things that CLN does is geared towards maybe institutions and oil and gas companies. So what I'm asking is there a way to maybe introduce an aspect that allows individuals to contribute to this without actually being institutions? That's my question.
In terms of contribution, are you thinking of actual, call it emission reductions on a, call it
Yeah.
household basis?
Yes.
So again, it's a good question. I think the very short answer is we're talking kind of significant projects because the amount of paperwork, validation, auditing, and documentation that is needed is significant. It's actually one way that this actually works, just to kind of illustrate with one example, is around a program based such as clean cooking. So for example, where there is a rollout of, for the sake of argument, 100,000 clean cooking stoves over a, whatever, large area of a country or, several villages, that's where the program sponsor would do such a project. But you as an individual, or anyone as an individual in that doesn't necessarily partake on it directly, but you will be benefiting from the fact that there is such a program. Okay, and of course, you could illustrate it another way around, is that if a village decided they want to do such a project, they can do it, but it has to have volume. And because obviously it has to be in the kind of tens of thousands of tons for this to kind of make sense, because obviously, if not, the work of, making sure that all this framework is kind of put in place, it's very, very difficult to make money on it.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. In terms of like barrier to entry now, for example, to start projects like this, is there like a minimum amount required to start something like this?
I would say call it below 10,000 tons is not very interesting, because again, it's just this idea that it's very, very, very difficult to get all these things done. It takes international auditors, etc. So we're really talking of industrial emission reductions. And even if it was, for example, a methane, I'll give an example. Call it, for example, a mangrove project, a restoration project. So think about it like a delta where there would be mangroves. We were looking at a project, and the size we're talking about. So if you think about that whole peninsula that goes from Lagos all the way to Benin, that's 78 square kilometers. That whole peninsula goes all the way to Republic of Benin. The size of the projects that are being done globally are in the tens of thousands of square kilometers of mangrove. So we're talking kind of half of Niger Delta for one project. So they're very, very large.
All right, thank you. That makes sense.
I see Dr. Malami Mohammed's.
Yeah, Dr. Malami Mohammed, please.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have a question, sir. Talking about our nationally determined contribution, I know each country set aside, their nationally determined contribution towards achieving net zero. So, but I'm not sure in terms of measurements whether we are actually, measuring these targets and whether we are on track or not. So, and especially looking at in your presentation, you mentioned a couple of sites that we are able to do some flare out projects. So how are we? Are we doing well in terms of progress towards our net zero plan and ambition? And if not, what should we do in order to achieve the target of 2060? Thank you so much.
Excellent question. And I'll also, by the way, just to note, I see also a question in the chat, so I'll take that afterwards. I just need to read it. I was listening to Dr. Mohammed first here. Okay. The national determined contribution is the level of reduction that Nigeria should do compared to a baseline around 2012 to 2050. Right? There are many different numbers, but just think of this as in 2050 there is a date, and then there's 2060, and then there's 2030 and whatever. But the reduction that is needed, that Nigeria has committed to, and some of the things that I mentioned are part goals of that same commitment, right? So it's not just one kind of blanket commitment. There are many other kind of underneath that kind of tallies up to the main commitment. But to try and answer your question, the NDC of Nigeria envisages a 27% reduction of total emissions across Nigeria compared to 2012. We're not in the right direction, right, on the global one. Why? Because first of all, Nigeria's growing population, there's industrialization going on. There is generally, obviously, the same production of oil and gas. There's the same flaring, it's the same methane leaks as there were when these commitments were made 7, 8 years ago. So in terms of that, call it what is called unconditional commitment, we are not doing well. And then there is an unconditional commitment, which is, a conditional commitment, which is a commitment that is in addition to the unconditional of another 27%. So that would be a total of 47% reduction, total reduction of emissions. Of course, if we're not doing well on the conditional, we're not doing very well on the unconditional. If we're not doing well on the unconditional, we're not doing well on the conditional either. However, just important to mention the conditional, because the condition that is given to is if Nigeria gets economic support, financial support from rich countries. So that's kind of envisaging carbon credits, but it's also envisaging just direct financial support and technological support from outside. So in a way, you could think of this as, obviously, we need to do much more. And since you mentioned what do we need to do, I think one of them is to kind of really start looking at call it the global side of things, and saying, how do we actually reduce emissions, industrial emissions in Nigeria, and obviously regulations, etc. As I mentioned and thank you for the question, because obviously my implication of coming with recommendations to the regulations is to say we need to strengthen and we need to have much more dialogue and really to make sure everyone understands what we have actually committed to. Right? I live in Nigeria. This is where I work and live and where my family is. So it's obviously the same as my commitments as much as any other citizen in Nigeria's commitment. Now, of the flare commitment and the zero routine flaring commitments that are part of the NDC, but also part of many other international commitments that Nigeria has made, we're doing also very bad. We are not reducing emissions from that. Certainly the projects that I showed you, obviously we are reducing because obviously we're doing those projects, but at the same time, Nigeria is still kind of, together with a handful of other countries, in a pretty not so good class of countries that flare a lot and have a lot of methane leaks. So obviously what we can do there is obviously to a much greater degree open up to cooperation and partnerships and thinking of how do we actually reduce emissions, right? As in, look, it's every oil company's first priority would be to drill another well, right? It's not to reduce emissions, but we need to do both, I think is the short answer. And obviously we need to work with NUPRC and with the government and with the local operators, because in the end, at one point in the future, and I don't think it will be too far in the future, there will be a problem, which is that other international countries, i.e. where we trade the products that we make, which is oil and gas, will have a challenge being traded if the emissions are too high. Let me see, there are two questions on the side. Let me take the first one, which is, not sure if it was mentioned in the presentation how CO2 emission reduction is verified and what regulations govern methane emissions, considering the level of environmental impact. Okay, so it's verified. We will come in and we will document the before you reduce the emissions, and then we'll go in afterwards to verify the post. Now, one example is we will go in with a high-tech infrared camera, and we will quantify the amount of emissions that are being given at any given time, right? So over a minute, and then extrapolate out over a period of a year, and then reduce with, being very conservative, whatever, so that we say, well, there's probably 10% downtime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go back and do the same thing once you have made the change. That can be both methane leaks or flare. And then we need to bring in an auditor that audits and verifies what we have call it documented. So that's how that's done. And yes, also another threat here, there are now open sourced, not only for CO2, by the way, not only for methane leaks, there are other satellite services that are also free, where anyone can go in and see all the methane leaks globally across the globe as a shaming kind of exercise, and for civil society to come in and do certain things and put spotlight on this. This is a free service being done by GHG Sat together with some international sponsors. And that's another way of basically pointing out to large methane leaks or flare sites across the world. So that's another way of kind of just, pointing to what needs to happen. I just want to mention now, maybe if I have time, also there is a similar such satellite service, which is actually paid by the Norwegian government, which is for deforestation globally or across every tropical rainforest and tropical forest across the world. So it will track every deforestation that is happening across the globe. Now, importantly, over Nigeria, actually, at least when I look out my window now, it's a cloud cover, right? So actually, it's not so good in Nigeria to do satellite because they're of the cloud cover. So just to be aware that actually in Nigeria is one of those countries where you actually do need to come and do on-site verifications and measurements, which is what we do as part of our service or part of what we do. So anyway, that was that question. And then there is another question. Let me see. My question is, in your perspective, which approach is more perspective and more effective between biological and the conventional geosequestration, as Nigeria's case may be? I'm not sure if I understand that question. Could you please care to elaborate a bit? Because I think, first of all, whilst you elaborate, or if you want to unmute, please just jump in. But I think, first of all, it's not necessarily the simplest, easiest, most cost-effective, and this is mind-blowing. There is no technology needed. There is no rocket science, alchemy, or anything special needed. Let's start with a simple number. 50% of all emissions from oil and gas globally, and Nigeria will certainly be 50%, is actually net positive to do. I.e., you will make more money from reducing the emissions than to keep it going. So 50%. So if you think about it from the point of view, if we agree that there is a climate change issue, and we agree that we need to do something, and that we agree that the NDCs at least should be somewhat followed, then 50% of those emissions is probably higher in Nigeria because the flare fine is high and the cost, the sales price of gas is actually pretty good, and you can get carbon credits. At least 50% of the emissions is for sure positive. You will make money from doing that. The 80% of all emissions from oil and gas can be done for less than $20 per ton of CO2 emissions. Now, if you think about the fact that in EU, the ETS, so the European trading system, which is a cap and trade system that goes between two countries, is now trading at $80 to $100, it means that 80% or more, right, of all emissions could be done away with either by making money from the first 50% or up to $20 per ton in removal fee. So I kind of understand your question, but actually I just want to kind of reply and say, of all the things we can do, the simplest is not to emit. And certainly if we make money stopping emitting, it's kind of, for me personally, a no-brainer. Thank you. If there are any other questions, I do apologize. I don't see any hands nor comments, please.
Okay, I think we don't have any more questions. We don't have any more questions. Thank you. Can we see some virtual applause for our speaker for taking out time to respond to all of the questions and give us an amazing lecture? Please celebrate him in the comment section, please. Celebrate him in the comment section. Thank you so much, sir, for your amazing lecture. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, would like to inform you that this is an opportunity for you to join SPE. Of course, SPE is an organization for all of today's industry professionals, regardless of experience in the course of study. Of course, you have students' benefits and professional member benefits. We are just advising that it's time for membership renewal. Of course, the renewal started right from September and ends 31st of December. The fee is on your screen, about 6,500 for new membership, 69,500 for renewal. And of course, the reinstatement fee, if you don't pay before 31st December, is about 17,000. We advise that you take a screenshot of what you see on the screen so that you can message our membership chair. The account number is also on the screen. Please do well to take a screenshot so that you can have a smooth and seamless payment with GT Bank. We have social media, several social media platforms, from Instagram to X, now to LinkedIn, to Facebook, and of course to YouTube. This event and a lot of our previous events are live streamed on YouTube. You can always go back and watch and refresh your memory. Should you have any kind of inquiries, kindly send an email to spabuja-info@gmail.com. And of course, in 24 hours, we would respond to you. We'd like to also inform you that we have an event coming up on the 2nd of December. Of course, this event is the Distinguished Lecturer Program, which is themed Multi-Phase Metering, a digital tool for decarbonization. It's going to happen on 2nd December at African University of Science and Technology. You should visit our social media pages because you get more information of these events. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome our amiable programs chair, Professor Kafayat Ademi, as she comes forward for her closing remark. Prof, the stage is yours.
Good evening again, everyone, and thank you for staying tuned. It has been a very interactive and engaging session, and I want to thank the speaker, Hein Markevik, for taking time. I do appreciate your prompt response to my inquiries, my clarifications, and for actually agreeing, because you had said November was a tight schedule, but I told you we need you to speak to us in November, and you did oblige us. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming aboard. I also want to thank the ESCO section chair, publicity team, the programs department, for our professionals, our young professionals, and everyone that participated, for making this session very interactive and engaging. And so thank you, everyone, and a very good evening to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, programs chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of today's lecture. I would like to kindly appeal that you turn on your video cameras. Let's see your beautiful faces, and let's take a virtual screenshot for the gram. Thank you so much. And kindly turn on your video cameras. Turn your video cameras. Thank you. Turn your video cameras. Thank you. So when I say SP Abuja, you respond with culture of excellence. With your thumbs up, I say SP Abuja, you respond with culture of excellence with your thumbs up. Of course, you can smile if you want to smile. Thumbs up. SP Abuja.
Culture of excellence.
Okay, please, can you just turn your video camera? I think we have so many people that have not turned it on. Anthony Justice, Toyin Yusuf, Chinon Sobi, Abubakar M.A., Joseph Kailo, Real One, Aldu, Hamza,
I'm sorry,
Ebolonu,
that's the place where I can turn my on.
University of Nigeria. Okay, we'll take it for the last time. Your thumbs up when I say SP Abuja, you respond with culture of excellence. SP Abuja.
Culture of excellence.
Not smiling. You should smile and show us that. SP Abuja.
Culture of excellence.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We come to the end of today's event. See you on the 2nd of December. Of course, it's going to be very interesting at African University of Science and Technology. I'm going to leave you for 5 minutes to do a networking and then close the meeting in 5 minutes. Thank you.